To Syria now, where a national dialogue on reforms has just wrapped up. This comes after the American and French embassies were attacked on Monday. Bothaina Shabaan is a presidential advisor, and I'm pleased to say she joins us now from Damascus. Thanks so much for your time on this day. Did the attacks on the American and French embassies take place with Syrian government approval?
Of course not. Syria is a historic country. It understands the protocol of foreign embassies on its land, and we immediately went to the site and arrested people, and they were investigated, and this is something that we absolutely object to. But I think you have to understand the anger of the Syrian people when they saw the American and the French ambassador going to Hama and muddling with our internal affairs, which is also unprecedented in our country.
You make two statements there. I want to pick up on the first one, that you said that you responded immediately. That has been directly and completely refuted by U.S. officials who say your security forces stood by and were very slow to respond.
That's not true. The moment we heard about it, our police came and our police behaved and our police arrested the people. This is something that we do not want. It is not in our interest. It's absolutely against the interest of our relation with the U.S. and with France. But I would say that you should be here to see the anger of the Syrian people about the statements and about interference and muddling with our opposition and with our internal affairs.
The anger that a lot of the world sees is from Syrian people who are standing up and saying that this regime has not given them the freedoms and the rights that they deserve. Some would say that they don't see this meddling that you talk of on the part of the Syrian and the French. I mean, what evidence do you have of that?
Well, the Syrian people are 23 million people, and there are different opinions. But the national dialogue that has been completed today shows the will of the Syrian people for a peaceful transition towards democracy. So what we expect from the largest democracy in the world is to encourage a peaceful transition to democracy and not to encourage extremists and armed elements who want to create sectarian wars and chaos in our country. I trust the American people do not like wars, do not like to support chaos as there's happening in Libya. What they should do is to support our peaceful transition towards democracy.
Within Shabaan, you and other government officials have repeatedly blamed the bloodshed on the streets of Syria and laid it at the doorstep of so-called armed groups, armed elements. Are you saying the government has no responsibility to take in the events and the loss of life in Syria?
No, the government is responsible because it is the government. It is responsible for peace and the quiet in the country. But there is so much media and so much incitement of sectarian hatred on televisions, and you could see them, unfortunately, on Arab television, that are inciting hatred, inciting killing, and inciting bloodshed. Of course, the government is trying its best to control that, by putting an end to that and by also enhancing the reform process and enhancing the national dialogue. Thus, the obligation of Western government is to support national dialogue, not to go to Hama on the week of a national dialogue and to support people who are saying no to dialogue. No to dialogue means yes to violence. So the Western powers should choose which one they should support.
Some of the opposition factions boycotted these very national dialogue talks and said that you could not have credible talks when the government continued its crackdown. In Homs and Hama just last week, there were still, according to activists, people being detained and killed. So how do you respond to that in terms of your claim that the government is sincere in terms of reforms?
Well, Hama is a city that armed elements had been preventing thousands of people from getting from villages to city. They have been closing the town for a week. I think if this were in the United States Army will never allow such a thing to happen in one of its cities. And as for the opposition, 80% of people present in the national dialogue were opposition, but an opposition who wants a solution to the crisis, not an opposition who wants to stay as a negative opposition and who wants to depend on forces outside Syria.
Let me play for you some sound from U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton and get your response. Let's run that sound.
from our perspective, he has lost legitimacy. He has failed to deliver on the promises he's made. He has sought and accepted aid from the Iranians as to how to repress his own people. And there's a laundry list of actions that have been certainly concerning and should raise the issue with not only his behavior, but those who are supporting him in the international community. And, we would like to see even more countries speaking out as forcefully as we have.
Your response to that, Ms. Shabaan?
I think I would like to say to the Secretary of State, it is not herself who gives legitimacy to President Bashar al-Assad, it is the people of Syria. And I think they should give up this imperial attitude of saying who is legitimate and who is not legitimate. It is now the role of the people to decide who is legitimate in their country. And I think it is the obligation of the largest democracy in the world to support the peaceful transition to democracy in Syria, rather than to support no dialogue and to support armed elements and people who obstruct roads and kill people on the streets.
But you cannot just discard out of hand the comments made by the Secretary of State, because the bottom line is, Bothaina Shabaan, people are taking to the streets in Syria and they are saying that the government is unrepresentative and has lost its legitimacy.
Well, we are issuing a law for political parties, a law for free media, an electoral law, and there will be elections, and let the one who win in the election win in the election. But I don't think it is up to any Secretary of State to tell the president of any other country whether he is legitimate or not legitimate. How could Mrs. Hillary Clinton decide whether our president is legitimate? Look at what they did in Libya. What did they bring in Libya? Civil war and chaos, and hundreds of innocent Libyans had been killed since NATO power has come to Libya. The Syrian people can see that, and the Syrian people want to follow a peaceful transition to democracy. We expect from the largest democracy in the world to support us, not to stand with the extremists and with violence and with sectarian hatred.
The national dialogue has indeed wrapped up. There were a number of recommendations made. But tell me this, how are you going to get this country on the right path when, despite the fact you say 80% of the opposition was present, there were still significant factions of the opposition that were not present? How are you going to bring everybody together so you can move forward?
We left the door open at the end of the national dialogue. Anybody who would like to join in would join on later on. The process of political reform is moving on. And I would like to remind you, Aisha, that in all democracies in the world, when the country is in a crisis, both opposition, government and people stand hand in hand in order to take the country out of the crisis. That's what I say to the Syrian opposition and to the American and Western powers.